The stars did not weep for Earth. Once, Sol had been the beating heart of humanity's empire, a beacon of defiance in an unforgiving galaxy. Now, it was a tomb. Where blue oceans had once sparkled beneath a golden sun, only a graveyard of ash and frozen debris remained. The Xelvani Dominion had not simply conquered Earth. They had erased it. It had begun with orbital bombardments, continent-splitting kinetic strikes that shattered mountains and boiled away seas. Then came the purge fleets, glassing entire cities from orbit, incinerating anything that still clung to life. The United Terran Republic, proud and unyielding, had fought to the last. They sent every warship, every soldier, every last round of ammunition against the Xelvani onslaught. It was not enough. Now, the galaxy believed humanity was finished. They were wrong. Deep within the Oort cloud, where ancient ice and rock drifted silently, a lone battleship lurked in the shadows. The Vengeance, once the pride of the Terran Armada, was now a ghost in the void. Its hull bore the scars of war, plasma scoring running deep along its titanium plating, but its reactors still pulsed with life. In the darkened command deck, Admiral Darius Voss stood before a shattered holographic display of Sol. He stared at the ruins of his homeworld, at the wreckage of a civilization that had once touched the stars. His hands clenched into fists, veins taut with fury. Around him, the last survivors of the Terran military awaited his words. Officers, engineers, Marines, all of them had seen their homes burned, their families slaughtered. Some had been rescued from Xelvani labor camps. Others had fought their way through enemy blockades just to stand here. They were all that remained. But they were enough. Voss turned to face them, his voice like iron. "They think we're dead." A murmur swept through the bridge. Even now, the Xelvani were broadcasting their victory across the stars, proclaiming that humanity was extinct, that the war was over, that resistance was futile. "They believe we are nothing but a memory," Voss continued. His gaze swept across his crew, his soldiers, his people. "That we will fade into history, forgotten and defeated." Silence. And then, rage, smoldering, unyielding. Voss stepped forward, his words carving into the air like steel. "But we are not dead. We are not beaten. And we sure as hell are not forgotten." The murmurs became whispers, the whispers became shouts. A pulse of something electric coursed through the room. "They killed our families," Voss said, his voice rising. "They burned our worlds. They hunted us across the void, but they did not break us." He pointed at the shattered display of Sol. "This is not our grave. This is our beginning." The bridge erupted. Fists slammed against consoles. Weapons were gripped tighter. The embers of despair had been doused in something far stronger. Vengeance. "We are the sons and daughters of Terra," Voss declared, his voice carrying the weight of history itself. "And we will remind them why they should have feared us." As the war room crackled with renewed purpose, a single transmission pulsed out from the Vengeance, bouncing between derelict satellites and hidden relays. It was an old Terran code, one long thought obsolete. But across the distant void, in forgotten shipyards and abandoned colonies, those who still carried the fire of humanity would see it. A single message. Terra is not dead. The avenging suns rise. And across the stars, the hunted prepared to become the hunters. The Xelvani Dominion ruled through fear. For centuries, they had expanded their empire, crushing weaker civilizations beneath their war fleets, enslaving those who survived. The fall of humanity had been their grandest victory, the final proof of their absolute power. They believed themselves untouchable. They had no idea what was coming. Deep in the desolate void of space, hidden within the jagged ruins of a forgotten Terran outpost, the avenging suns were gathering. The asteroid belt of Harkon 12 had once been a thriving mining colony, producing raw materials for the United Terran Republic's mighty fleets. When the Xelvani had come, they had razed it without mercy, reducing its cities and factories to drifting wreckage. But some of the colony's infrastructure had survived, buried deep beneath layers of rock and metal. Now those ruins served as the birthplace of humanity's vengeance. Inside a dimly lit hangar, Admiral Darius Voss stood atop a rusted catwalk, watching as engineers and soldiers swarmed the half-repaired hull of a Terran warship. The Indomitable, an old but formidable destroyer, was one of the many ships the Avenging Sons had salvaged. Each one was a relic of the old war, stripped for parts, repaired by hand, and reforged into something deadlier. Voss's second-in-command, Captain Elias Kane, approached, a grim look on his scared face. "We've intercepted another Xelveni transmission," Kane said, handing Voss a datapad. "They've declared open season on human survivors. Any ship suspected of harboring Terrans is to be destroyed on sight." Voss read the order, his jaw tightening. He already knew what that meant. More slaughter, more innocents burned away in the Dominion's endless pursuit of control. "Then we make them pay for every drop of blood they spill," Voss said coldly. "What's the status of the next strike?" Kane allowed himself a sharp grin. Ready to move. The mission was simple. A Xelveni supply convoy was passing through the Karsus Expanse, an unremarkable sector near the edge of Dominion space. The Dominion relied on these convoys to fuel their military machine. Destroying one wouldn't win the war, but it would send a message. And Voss intended to deliver it personally. ####. Hours later, the Vengeance and a small strike force of frigates drifted in the darkness of Karsus Expanse, their hulls running silent. They had positioned themselves in the thick dust clouds of a shattered moon, waiting like predators in the deep. Then the Xelveni arrived. 6 cargo ships escorted by 2 light cruisers, hardly a challenge. The Dominion had grown careless, too accustomed to victory. They didn't expect ghosts to be lurking in the void. Voss leaned forward in his captain's chair, watching the Xelveni ships glide into the ambush zone. "Hold," he ordered. The tension on the bridge was thick, but his crew trusted him. They had learned patience was a weapon. The Xelveni cruisers, oblivious to the danger, moved ahead of the convoy, scanning for threats that weren't there. The moment they passed, Voss gave the order. Fire. Railguns thundered in the silence of space. The first Xelveni cruiser never saw it coming. A dozen hypervelocity rounds punched through its shields, tearing through its bridge. The warship listed, venting fire and bodies into the void. The second cruiser tried to react, but it was too slow. The Vengeance launched a spread of torpedoes, and a heartbeat later, the ship was engulfed in a brilliant explosion. Panic spread through the convoy. The Xelveni cargo ships scattered, but there was nowhere to run. The Avenging Sons descended like wraiths, cutting down fleeing ships with precision strikes. Within minutes, the battle was over. Not a single Xelveni vessel remained. Voss stood as the wreckage drifted in the blackness. "Broadcast our message." A transmission was sent to every Dominion outpost within range, piggybacking off their own networks, ensuring that Xelveni would hear it. "You believed humanity was gone. You were wrong. We are the Avenging Sons. We are coming for you." Across the galaxy, the first whispers of terror began to spread. The ghosts of Terra had returned, and they were just getting started. The Xelveni Dominion had always ruled with arrogance. For centuries, they believed their dominion unshakable, their might absolute. But after the sudden destruction of their supply convoy in the Karsus Expanse, fear crept into their high command. The Terrans were supposed to be extinct. Yet here they were, striking from the shadows, dismantling the Dominion piece by piece. The Xelveni dismissed it at first: pirates, mercenaries, scattered remnants. But when entire garrisons started vanishing and high-ranking officials turned up dead in their own fortresses, they realized the truth. Humanity was still alive, and it wanted blood. The Avenging Sons' next target was Krevos 9, a major Xelveni industrial world deep in the Dominion's coreward sectors. It wasn't just a factory world, it was a prison. Thousands of enslaved humans toiled in its foundries, forging weapons and ships for the very enemy that had destroyed their home. Admiral Darius Voss stared at the holographic display of the planet from the war room aboard the Vengeance. Red highlighted structures marked planetary defenses, shield generators, orbital guns, garrisons of Selvani warriors. It was a fortress. But fortresses could be cracked. His officers stood around the war table, awaiting his command. "We hit them hard. We hit them fast," Voss said, eyes scanning his team. "No prolonged engagements. We cripple their defenses, spark an uprising, and get the hell out before reinforcements arrive." Captain Elias Kane smirked. "Nothing like a good old-fashioned revolution." Commander Leora Vega, the team's infiltration specialist, leaned forward. "We have people on the ground. Slaves, prisoners, some of our own who went dark months ago. They're ready to move once we take out the planetary command center." Voss nodded. "Then let's make sure they get their chance." The battle for Kravos 9 began at midnight cycle. A Selvani patrol fleet drifted lazily above the planet, their crews oblivious to the death lurking in the void. The Avenging Sun's strike force burst from the darkness, railguns roaring, torpedoes streaking through the black like falling stars. The first Selvani warship barely had time to raise shields before it was torn apart. Explosions rippled through the fleet as Terran ships weaved between enemy fire, moving with a precision that only Vengeance could fuel. On the surface, chaos erupted. The moment the orbital defenses went offline, infiltration teams struck like knives. Vega led a squad through the foundries, cutting down Selvani overseers and unlocking slave barracks. At first, there was silence, hesitation. The humans, beaten and broken, stared at their liberators in disbelief. Then came the rage. The uprising spread like wildfire. Armed with stolen plasma rifles, makeshift explosives, and raw fury, the enslaved humans tore into their former masters. The Selvani, unused to resistance, faltered. Their arrogance had made them blind, and now they paid the price in blood. In the planetary command center, a Selvani general cowered as the doors burst open. Admiral Voss stepped through the smoke, his sidearm raised. The Selvani's mandibles clicked in terror as he stumbled backward. You are supposed to be dead." Voss shot him in the head. Behind him, the Terran flag was hoisted over the command center, its blue and white insignia bathed in firelight. The transmission was sent to every Dominion system within range. "We are humanity. We are not conquered, and we are coming." Kravos 9 burned that night, not under the boots of its oppressors, but in the fires of liberation. The Avenging Suns had delivered their first true hammer blow. And across the Dominion, fear began to take root. Kravos 9 was the first true victory, but it would not be the last. Across the Selvani Dominion, news of the uprising spread like wildfire. Human slaves on other worlds began to resist. Some simply fought and died, but others, those with weapons, with knowledge of their enemy, held their ground. The Selvani tried to contain the rebellion, but for the first time in their empire's history, fear spread through their ranks. The ghosts of Terra had returned. But Admiral Darius Voss knew the truth. Kravos 9 was a battle, not the war. If the Avenging Suns wanted to win, they needed more than hit-and-run strikes. They needed to become an army. And to build an army, they needed ships. Their destination was Keystone Station, a long-abandoned Terran shipyard hidden in the shattered remains of the Veridan asteroid field. Once a vital hub for the Terran Republic, it had been one of the first targets in the war. The Selvani had crippled its defenses, destroyed its power grid, and left it to drift. But the Selvani never destroy what they think they can't use. Beneath the layers of wreckage, Keystone Station still held secrets. The Vengeance and its escort fleet emerged from slip space in the shadow of the station, its massive skeletal remains looming over them. For decades, it had been silent, cold, dead. That changed the moment the first boarding crews landed. Lights flickered to life. Old systems, long dormant, groaned as power surged through them. Hundreds of technicians, engineers, and combat teams flooded the station, working to reactivate ancient assembly lines and reclaim long-lost technology. Captain Elias Kane wiped grease from his hands as he stood beside Voss in one of the station's cavernous hangars. Before them, rows of dormant Terran warships sat entombed in darkness. Half-built destroyers, decommissioned battleships, even the burnt husk of a dreadnought, all awaiting the touch of human hands. Kane let out a low whistle. "It's a goddamn graveyard." "No," Voss said, his voice firm. "It's a resurrection." Days turned to weeks as Keystone Station roared back to life. Teams of salvagers stripped broken ships for parts. Engineers worked tirelessly to merge Terran and Selveni technology, integrating stolen Dominion systems into Terran hulls. Fighters and corvettes were brought online first, followed by gunships and bombers. They repaired railguns, reinforced armor plating, and scavenged Dominion databanks for weaknesses in Selveni fleet formations. And then came the dreadnought. She was old, scared, and partially gutted from battle damage, but her nameplate still gleamed. Ironclad. She had been lost in the early days of the war, presumed destroyed. But here she was, waiting. Voss stood on the command bridge as the reactor was reignited. The deck trembled beneath his feet as power surged through her once more. Screens flickered. Consoles beeped. A ship that had been dead for decades opened its eyes. For the first time since Earth burned, the Terran fleet had its flagship. As Keystone Station worked at full capacity, war plans began to take shape. Commander Leora Vega, their infiltration expert, studied the Dominion's growing response. The Selveni are tightening security around their core systems. They've increased patrols, locked down outposts, and started hunting us. Kane leaned back against a console. "Good. Let them come. We're not running anymore." Voss stepped forward, studying the latest reports. The Dominion wasn't just reacting. They were scrambling. Kravos 9 had shaken them. The loss of a major industrial world, a freed slave population, and a strike force they couldn't catch had shattered their illusion of control. But illusions could be rebuilt. The Dominion had nearly infinite resources, an empire spanning hundreds of systems, and the will to burn entire planets if necessary. If humanity wanted to truly break them, they needed to hit harder. Voss turned to his officers. "We've been striking from the shadows, making them bleed. That changes now." He gestured to the newly awakened ironclad. "We take this fleet, and we go on the offensive." The Avenging Sons had fought to survive. Now, they would fight to conquer. The Selveni had ruled the galaxy with absolute dominance, but dominance breeds complacency. For centuries, they had crushed any who opposed them, believing no force could threaten their might. Even after Kravos 9 fell, they convinced themselves it was an isolated incident, a rogue uprising that would be stamped out in due time. Then the ironclad awoke, and the war truly began. From Keystone Station, the Avenging Sons launched a coordinated campaign of destruction. No longer were they scattered raiders, fighting in the shadows. They were an army now, and with their newly restored fleet, they struck at the Dominion with the full force of Terran fury. Strike 1. The refineries of Thalvoris, a Selveni fuel world, were incinerated in a surprise assault. The Dominion's war fleets, reliant on steady fuel shipments, suddenly found themselves stranded. Strike 2. The prison moons of Deros 5 were liberated, releasing thousands of human captives, some of them former Terran soldiers who had been presumed dead for years. Many of these prisoners, hardened by years of suffering, joined the fight. Strike 3. A Dominion High Admiral, responsible for orchestrating the extermination of Earth, was assassinated in his own palace. His corpse was left on the steps of the Selveni capital, a message burned into the walls behind him. For Terra, across the Dominion, panic took root. The Avenging Sons were no longer just a rebellion. They were a crusade. Inside the command center of the ironclad, Admiral Voss stood over a holographic map of the Dominion. Red markers signified Selveni strongholds. Some had already been struck. Others were next. Vega scrolled through intercepted enemy transmissions. They're scrambling. The Dominion High Council has declared a state of emergency. They're calling us terrorists and fanatics. Kane scoffed. Terrorists. They burned our world. They enslaved our people. And they think we're the monsters. Voss remained quiet, studying the map. He didn't care what the Selveni called them. Only the outcome mattered. The time had come for the real war to begin. The first true battle of the campaign came at Vora Prime, a heavily fortified Selveni military world. Unlike previous strikes, this was no hit-and-run attack. This was a full-scale planetary assault. The Ironclad led the charge, emerging from slip space at the head of a growing Terran fleet. The Dominion defenders, expecting scattered raids, were caught unprepared for an organized naval onslaught. Terran destroyers weaved between Selveni battlecruisers, railguns ripping through shields, torpedoes turning hulls into burning wreckage. Human-piloted starfighters, faster and more maneuverable than their Dominion counterparts, tore apart enemy squadrons with ruthless precision. Then came the ground invasion. Drop pods slammed into the surface like meteor strikes, disgorging battalions of Terran Marines. These weren't the same soldiers who had once fought for the United Terran Republic. These were warriors forged in fire, survivors hardened by the fall of their species. They tore through Selveni defenses, moving with the fury of men and women who had nothing left to lose. City by city, block by block, they fought, giving no quarter, accepting none in return. The battle raged for hours, then days. The Selveni, unused to facing an enemy that would rather die than surrender, began to crack. Their commanders, desperate and terrified, broadcasted pleas for reinforcements. None came. The Dominion was too busy fighting fires across its empire, too slow to respond to a force that no longer fought in shadows, but in open war. And so, Vora Prime fell. As the last Selveni stronghold crumbled, the Terran banner was raised over the smoldering ruins of their command citadel. For the first time since the war began, a Dominion world was no longer under Dominion rule. In the aftermath, as Voss stood on the ruined balcony of the Selveni governor's palace, Vega approached with new intelligence. "We found something," she said, handing him a datapad. "Classified Dominion files. Coordinates to something big." Voss read the data. His expression darkened. This wasn't just another outpost or supply line. It was something more. He turned to his officers. This war isn't over. Their fleet had won its first true battle, but the real fight was still to come. Vora Prime had fallen. Across the Dominion, the Selveni reeled. The humans weren't just rebels anymore. They weren't scattered survivors lashing out in blind rage. They were an army, a force capable of destroying entire worlds. And now, they had momentum. But Admiral Voss knew momentum wasn't enough. The Dominion still had fleets 10 times the size of theirs, armies that could drown them in bodies. If humanity wanted to win, they needed to strike at the heart of the beast. And the datapad Vega recovered from Vora Prime had given them exactly what they needed: a target. The Thalaxoran shipyards were the largest military construction facility in the Dominion. It was where the Selveni forged their dreadnoughts, battlecruisers, and planetary assault craft, the very tools they used to crush entire civilizations. Voss stared at the holographic projection of the shipyard, a massive latticework of steel and energy suspended above a gas giant. It was heavily defended, fortified battle stations, a planetary shield, and a fleet of warships protecting it at all times. "This is the beating heart of their war machine," Vega said, scrolling through the intelligence files. "If we take it out, we cripple their ability to build new fleets." Kane smirked. "Sounds like a great place to burn to the ground." But Voss wasn't smiling. He knew this wasn't just another strike mission. This was an all-in attack. The Avenging Sun's fleet arrived in the Thalaxoran system like a storm. The Ironclad, leading a battle group of destroyers, gunships, and repurposed Selveni vessels, dropped out of slip space and opened fire before the Dominion even knew they were there. The Selveni defenders scrambled, their warships rushing into formation. Plasma bolts and railgun slugs tore through the void, the battle erupting into a deadly ballet of fire and destruction. But the Avenging Suns had the element of shock. They struck fast and hard, weaving through enemy formations with a ferocity that Terran pilots had perfected in their years of hit-and-run warfare. Dominion battlecruisers were ripped apart by torpedo barrages, their shields overwhelmed in seconds. Then came the boarding teams. Drop pods slammed into the shipyards, breaching through layers of armor plating. Terran Marines flooded into the facility, cutting through Selveni defenses like a blade through flesh. Vega led the infiltration team, navigating the twisting corridors of the station toward the primary reactor core. Their mission wasn't just to disable the shipyard. It was to destroy it. Outside, the battle intensified. The Selveni flagship, the dreadnought Wrath of the Dominion, turned its cannons toward the ironclad. A single broadside from its main battery could vaporize an entire city. But Admiral Voss wasn't about to let that happen. "All ships," he commanded, his voice calm over the fleet-wide comms. "Focus fire." Railguns thundered. Swarms of bombers streaked toward the dreadnought, launching wave after wave of armor-piercing torpedoes. The Wrath's shields flared and buckled under the relentless assault. And then, with a final devastating volley from the ironclad's main guns, the Selveni dreadnought shattered, 1,billion tons of burning wreckage collapsing into the gas giant below. Inside the shipyards, Vega's team reached the core. They planted charges along the facility's main reactor, setting a countdown that would rip the entire station apart. But the Selveni weren't giving up without a fight. As Vega and her team raced back to the extraction point, Selveni warriors flooded the corridors, elite soldiers in heavy armor, their plasma rifles spitting deadly fire. A brutal close-quarters battle erupted, gunfire and blades clashing in the tight confines of the station's inner structure. Vega took a plasma burn to the shoulder but kept moving, leading her squad through the chaos. Then the countdown hit zero. The Thalaxaren shipyards detonated in a supernova of fire and shrapnel. Selveni warships, still locked in battle, were caught in the explosion, their hulls ripped apart by the shockwave. The remaining Dominion forces, seeing their shipyard reduced to floating debris, broke formation and fled. The Avenging Suns had won. The Selveni war machine had been shattered. On the bridge of the ironclad, Admiral Voss watched the burning wreckage drift through space. The battle was over, but there was no celebration. Only the grim understanding that the Dominion would not take this loss lightly. Kane exhaled. "Well, that's going to piss them off." Vega, still clutching her wounded shoulder, smirked. "Good. Let them come." Voss remained silent. He knew what was coming next. The Dominion had been wounded, humiliated, but now they would lash out with everything they had left. This war wasn't over. It was only about to get worse, and the final battle was on the horizon. The destruction of the Thalaxaren shipyards sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Never in the history of the Dominion had an enemy dared to strike so deeply into their heart. Never had a foe crippled their war machine. The Selveni High Council, once divided in their response to the rebellion, now spoke with one voice. Humanity was no longer an insurgency to be crushed in the shadows. They were an enemy to be exterminated. From the outer colonies to the core systems, the Dominion mobilized its full military might. Entire fleets were recalled from expansion campaigns, soldiers pulled from garrison worlds, and new war doctrines drafted, all for one purpose: to end the Avenging Suns in a single decisive stroke. Voss and his commanders knew what was coming. Inside the war room aboard the ironclad, they studied long-range scans of Selveni fleet movements. Dozens of battle groups were converging, forming into a force unlike anything humanity had ever faced. Kane leaned over the holographic display. "That's a lot of ships." Vega crossed her arms. "They're not going to let us keep hitting them and running. They're coming for us." Voss nodded. which means we need to choose where we make our stand. There was only one choice. Kravos 9, the first world humanity had liberated. Now it would become the battleground for the war's final phase. The Avenging Suns began fortifying the planet. Every available ship was recalled. Orbital defenses were rebuilt. Anti-air batteries were installed. The factories of Kravos 9, once a prison for human workers, were now producing weapons of war at full capacity. As the fleet prepared for battle, a message was sent across the stars. To every free human, every slave still in chains, every soul that still remembered Earth, a single transmission broadcast across Dominion space. Humanity stands. Join us. And across the galaxy, people listened. Slave worlds erupted into revolt. Hidden colonies sent reinforcements. Merchant fleets smuggled in weapons and supplies. The Avenging Suns were no longer alone. For the first time since the fall of Earth, humanity was united. Then the Dominion arrived. The largest Selveni fleet in history emerged from slip space. Hundreds of warships, dreadnoughts larger than cities, and swarms of attack craft blotted out the stars. At the head of it all was the Dominion's supreme warlord, High Lord Selrathos, the architect of Earth's destruction. His voice echoed through the comms, broadcast across the battlefield. This is your last day, humans. There will be no more mercy. Admiral Voss stood firm on the ironclad's bridge, staring at the overwhelming force before them. And he did not flinch. He opened the fleet-wide comms, his voice calm, unwavering. We are the last sons of Terra. We do not kneel. We do not beg. We do not break. He looked out at his fleet, his people, his species, and gave the order. Fight. And so, the Battle of Kravos 9 began. The Dominion unleashed hell. Dreadnoughts opened fire, their weapons ripping through space, turning smaller ships into flaming wreckage. But the Avenging Suns did not falter. Gunships weaved through enemy formations, dropping payloads of torpedoes and railgun rounds into Selveni capital ships. Starfighters swarmed, human pilots outmaneuvering their enemy counterparts, fighting with a desperation only the freeborn can know. And at the heart of it all, the ironclad led the charge, its cannons blazing, its shields absorbing the brunt of the Selveni fury. On the surface, Terran Marines dug in, preparing for the inevitable ground invasion. They knew this wasn't just a battle. It was the final stand of their race. As the sky burned and ships shattered, Vega intercepted one last transmission from the Dominion flagship. Her eyes widened. They're not just trying to win. They're trying to erase us. Voss turned to her. Explain. She swallowed. They've activated a planet-killer weapon. A super weapon designed to wipe out all life on Kravos 9. Kane clenched his fists. They're going to burn us like they burned Earth. A deadly silence filled the bridge. Then Voss spoke. Not this time. He turned to his crew. The ironclad is going in. And so, as the battle raged, as the fate of humanity hung in the balance, the Avenging Suns prepared for their final gamble. They would take the fight to the heart of the enemy, onto the bridge of the Dominion flagship itself. One last strike. One last chance. Victory or extinction. The Dominion's doomsday weapon hung in orbit above Kravos 9, its massive core charging with energy capable of eradicating all life below. That Selveni had done this before. They had wiped Earth from the stars. They would not do it again. Aboard the ironclad, Admiral Voss gave the order that would decide the fate of humanity. All hands, prepare for final assault. We take the fight to the High Lord himself. This was it, the last battle of the war. With its engines burning at full thrust, the ironclad surged through the battlefield, dodging plasma barrages and railgun fire as it cut a path toward the Dominion flagship, the hand of Selrathos. It was the largest warship ever built, a fortress in the void. And it was the key to everything. The superweapon was linked to its command core. If Voss and his team could disable it, they could stop the destruction of Kravos 9. If they failed, every man, woman, and child on the surface would die. The ironclad slammed into the Dominion dreadnought, cutting through its hull with boarding drills and breaching torpedoes. Vega, Kane, and a squad of Terran warriors stormed inside, their weapons roaring as they tore through Selvani defenders. The hulls of the ship became a war zone. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air. Blades clashed in brutal melee. The Avenging Sons fought like demons, pushing through the corridors, racing toward the control center where High Lord Selrathos waited. On the surface of Kravos 9, the battle raged on. Zelveni dropships descended in waves, unleashing hordes of Dominion soldiers onto the war-torn cities. Terran Marines, outnumbered and outgunned, held the line. Bunkers burned. Artillery thundered. The ground was littered with the dead. Yet still, the humans would not break. They had survived the fall of Earth. They had endured the fires of slavery. Now, at the end of all things, they stood defiant. And even as the sky blazed with the light of dying ships, they fought on, because they knew their last hope rested with Voss and his strike team. Deep inside the hand of Selrathos, the Avenging Sons reached the command bridge. The doors slammed open, revealing the towering figure of High Lord Selrathos. He stood in his gilded war armor, a plasma blade burning in one hand, his other resting on the control console that would fire the planet killer. His golden eyes burned with pure hatred. "You have come far, vermin," he growled, "but you will go no further." Vega and Kane opened fire. Selrathos moved like lightning, deflecting shots with his blade before lunging forward, cutting down 2 Marines in an instant. Vega ducked, rolling under a swing, while Kane clashed blades with the High Lord, sparks flying as metal met energy. Voss didn't hesitate. He sprinted for the control console, knowing the weapon was nearly charged. Selrathos roared, throwing Kane aside and lunging at Voss, his blade aimed for the Admiral's heart. But Voss was ready. He sidestepped at the last moment, raising his sidearm, and fired point-blank into Selrathos's chest. The High Lord staggered, his armor cracking. Kane, bleeding but still standing, drove his blade into the alien's throat. Selrathos gurgled, his golden eyes wide with shock. And then the High Lord of the Dominion fell, his body crashing to the deck in a pool of violet blood. Voss turned to the control console. The weapon was still counting down. He didn't hesitate. He ripped open the panel, exposing the core. "We need to shut it down," Vega shouted. "There's no time," Voss said. The only way to stop it was to overload the system, but that meant the hand of Selrathos would explode. Voss gave the order. "Set the charges. We end this now." With the countdown seconds away from firing, the Avenging Sons planted their explosives and raced for the extraction point. As they boarded their dropship, the charges detonated. The hand of Selrathos imploded, its core overloading in a massive explosion that tore the Dominion flagship apart. The doomsday weapon was destroyed. Kravos 9 was saved. With their leader dead and their fleets decimated, the Dominion forces broke. Their warships retreated, their armies surrendered. And for the first time since the fall of Earth, humanity had won. In the aftermath, Voss stood atop the ruins of a Selveni command tower, watching as the last remnants of the Dominion fled into the void. Kane, his armor scorched and dented, stood beside him. "So, what now?" Vega smirked. "We rebuild. We hunt down the last of the bastards who did this to us." Voss looked out at the stars. The war was over, but the fight to reclaim humanity's place in the galaxy was just beginning. And as long as the Avenging Sons still drew breath, no force in the universe would ever threaten Terra's children again. Humanity had not perished. Humanity had risen, and the stars would remember their wrath. For Terra,